Hey guys, Fox here, and today it is time to do one of the last two 2024 UFL College Draft team recaps in the San Antonio Brahmas, the team that made it to the championship game but did not come out of the game as champion. Now the Brahmas are a weird team. A lot of people thought they weren't going to be that good this year, just like the Panthers, but ended up making it to the title game. Now even though they made it to the title game and did ultimately lose it, a lot of people would agree on a total sense of roster construction that they are the weakest of the four teams that made the playoffs. With that being said, they still don't really have that many weaknesses. It's just that they don't have as many strengths as teams like the Battlehawks, Panthers, and Stallions do. So in terms of what they wanted to do in the draft, there are actually a bit more options to do rather than the Panthers and Battlehawks, which more or less were trying to shore up like one area, and that's pretty much it. So it's going to be interesting. So again, if you end up enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload the last one, as the last one will be coming out later today. So without further ado, let's get started with their first pick and the 7th overall pick in Gabe Hall, defensive tackle out of Baylor. Now Hall is currently with the Philadelphia Eagles. During his college career, he played his entire time at Baylor. And overall, I mean, his last 3 years where he saw the most action, he put up some decent numbers, but really it was his second to last year. We had 37 total tackles, 5.5 TFLs, and 4.5 sacks was his best season, arguably. Or it was his second sophomore season where he had 7 TFLs and 6 sacks. Essentially, this is somebody who definitely can be a really solid guy up front. The Brahmas were heavily carried by a great defense this past year, and so getting somebody like a Gabe Hall who could potentially join the team at some point, who is one of those big body guys that's going to help you out a lot, is a good thing. Again, as a defensive tackle, having like 5.5, TFLs, 7 TFLs, or having 4.5 plus sacks, that's a really solid number for a defensive tackle. I mean, we've seen it, back in 2023 with Keontae Schott having a bunch of sacks that really helped the Breakers defense look good. Because when you have a defensive tackle that's putting up sacks, it's going to do a lot of damage to the opposing team, in a sense that you have somebody else that's actually threatening you rather than just your defensive ends. So this is a really solid pick. I think this is a good first-round pick for them. Now, their second-round pick was an actual edge rusher, this time in Gabriel Murphy, who is currently on the Minnesota Vikings. Now, as for Murphy, he played at North Texas and UCLA, his 3 seasons at North Texas, and then his couple years at UCLA. Now, overall, he played 26 games at UCLA, had 76 tackles, 20 for loss, and 9.5 sacks. Those are some really solid numbers to put up in just 26 games. And of course, in 2023, he put career highs in TFLs and sacks at 16 and 8. Which is really solid overall. That was 6th in the Pac-12 in sacks per game. So the fact is, this is somebody who can, rush the QB really well. Again, he's doing this to the Pac-12, which, granted the Pac-12 has been, kind of going down and down to where nowadays it's the Pac-2, but the point is, it's still a really impressive thing that he was able to pull off at UCLA. So this is somebody who, if he doesn't make the Minnesota Vikings roster, gets called up somewhere, he's going to help out a lot in the Brahmas front pass rush, because again, this is a great player to edge rush. So essentially, these top 2 picks are both very similar. Now, yes, one of them is interior and one is outside D-line, but they're both still D-line who both are able to get to the quarterback. These aren't just guys who, are good at getting tackles, guys who are just, good at being those disruptive guys. These are guys who can actually get to the QB or the running back when they're, still in the backfield. So when you have these type of guys, those are the kind of guys that can make your defense insanely terrifying. Just think back to the 2022 Houston Gamblers, where that defensive line, mainly helmed by Chris Odom, was just a nightmare to play against. So when you have something like this, it's a good thing. I also really like this pick. Now, the next selection was offensive tackle Donovan Jennings. Now, again, as I always talk about in all these, offensive line is the position you want to draft the most of. It's hard to get good O-linemen. Drafting as many as you can gives you the best shot at getting them to play for you and that they're going to be good. Now, he is currently on the Packers. Overall, he played 55 games and made 45 starts, which is up there in school history for USF. Overall, there's not much to say aside from the fact that this is another offensive line selection. You could argue there were some guys better. You can argue that some guys weren't. This is somebody who's currently on as an offensive guard / tackle for the Packers, but that was drafted as a tackle. If he's able to transition to play both, that can be huge, especially in a league where you only have so many roster spots open. So, good selection again. Now, their 4th pick was Miles Battle, cornerback out of Utah. He is currently on the Kansas City Chiefs. He only saw really 3 years of true action, 2 of them being at Ole Miss and 1 at Utah. And overall, he put up similar numbers in interception all 3 of his last seasons. He had at least 3 passes deflected or defended in his last 3 years. And when you look at him, I mean, it's a solid pick to get. Cornerback, help shore up your back end. It's another smart decision. Again, the defense wasn't the weakness of this Brahmas team. The defense was actually really good. Even in the championship game, it actually did enough to win. It was more so the offense did nothing. So at this point, I would say that through the 4 rounds, I think they're doing solid. It's just that you kind of would hope they would draft more offensive talent. But Miles Battle, solid selection. Now, their 5th round pick was another defensive lineman, this time in defensive end, Jamari Croma. Now, he comes out of JMU, and overall, he also played at Rutgers. Now, what he pulled off were some, again, great numbers at getting to the quarterback. So they're not drafting these guys, again, for just, different reasons. These are all guys for the edge rushers and defensive linemen that get to the quarterback. In the Sun Belt in JMU, he had 10 sacks and 19 TFLs his last season there. That is some really solid numbers. Again, if you're able to translate that even somewhat to the UFL's 10-game schedule, if you were to get, instead of 10 sacks, like let's say 6 sacks in a 10-game season, you're doing something right. Just like if you were able to somehow get like 10 TFLs, that's a great season. So if he's able to translate some of that to what he did at JMU, if he, ends up not making the Bears roster and all that, that would be huge. So again, this is another decision where you're drafting somebody that's very similar to the other guys, which makes sense, right? It's like I've talked about, double dipping. You can't say for certain that these guys are going to play for you at any point in the future. But if you draft multiple guys that do very similar things, either A, they're going to synergize really well because they both pass rush the QB, or B, only one of them comes into the team, but you drafted 2 of them, so you kind of expected at least one of them to. So I like this pick in a sense that it makes sense with everybody else. Just that, again, you're kind of not, hammering the area you really need. Now, they start doing that in the 6th round with Leadertrick Griffin. Now, when you look at Griffin, he is a wide receiver out of Mississippi State. Now, this is one of the positions they do need. Yes, their receiving core is better than I expected it to be, but it still left a little bit to be desired. And naturally, tight end is the big one. Cody Latimer said it was going to be his last year. Is it because of the injury? We don't know for sure, but get to that a bit later. As for Griffin, the more important thing is this is also a kick return type of guy, somebody who can actually be used as a kick returner. In college, 3 of his 4 years, he actually averaged over 30 yards a kick return, which is really incredible. Especially that 19 return season with 613 yards. He's had 2 return touchdowns in college, and while his last season he dipped to 22. Again, most of his college career he was having really good, returns. So hopefully that can translate well if he does go to, the UFL, because again, they're potentially going to change the kickoff again, but if not, who knows. Now, as a receiver, he also put up a couple decent years his last 2 years at Mississippi State. 500 yards and 650 yards, 4 TDs both times. Over 12 yards of reception. This is a guy who's a great returner, one of the best returners in college football for a little bit. Really solid player. This is a selection I really do like. You're getting somebody who can either help you out as a kick returner or as a wide receiver. Good pick. Now, their 7th round pick was Boo Braid, safety out of Maryland. Again, another defensive back selection, right? They picked a cornerback earlier, now you're picking a safety. Currently on the Ravens, played his whole career at Maryland. At Maryland, he put some really solid tackle numbers. 85 tackles his second to last year, 75 his last year. 3 total interceptions those last 2 years, and he had 8 TFLs the last 2 years as well. And he also had 11 passes defended his last 2 years and forced 3 fumbles. So this is a really solid safety to get. This is one of those guys who, again, if he can translate to the UFL, will translate really well. Is a really solid player to get for this team. And again, you're going, double dip. And while it's not the same corner and safety, you're still double dipping in the DB room. Smart decision, like it, just still questionable on how you're not dealing with a couple of weaknesses on your roster. Now, their 8th round pick was Sincere Haynesworth. Now, when you look at Haynesworth, center out of Tulane, again, you're going back to the offensive line. He was a 2-time first-team All-AAC with Tulane. Now, of course, the AAC also had a lot of changes, the last couple of years. But as for him, he's currently on the Saints. Again, it's another one of those solid ones. He's not like a huge center, 6'1", still a big guy. And overall, when you look at it, center is a hugely important position on the offensive line. And again, you're getting some more help up there. Smart decision, good pick. Now, their 9th round pick was DJ Miller Jr., Kent State cornerback. Now, he is currently on the Kansas City Chiefs. At Iowa State and Kent State, he really didn't see much time in Iowa, but as Kent State, he did have over 100 tackles his last 2 years combined. He only had 1 TFL, no sacks, 1 interception, so he wasn't one of those, corners that also does a lot of other stuff. He was mainly just a cornerback. 7 passes defended, 2 fumble recoveries. Not much to say here. Again, you're getting another one of, a cornerback. Some people would argue they don't really need to draft a lot of them. Some would say it's a smart decision. It is what it is. Now, their 10th round pick was Joshua Cephas. Now, when you look at Josh, wide receiver out of UTSA, was a first-team All-AAC, was a second-team All-Conference USA back in, 2022, because, UTSA changed conferences and all that. When you look at him, His last 3 years, he put up great numbers all 3 years. 800, 1,000, and 1,150. Now, especially when you see him go from the Conference USA to putting up 1,000 yards to putting up 1,150 in the AAC, that's impressive. Yes, that AAC was missing some of the other big boys that it used to have, but it's still, a lot of people would say, is one of the best, non-Power 5, or hell, some would argue it would be kind of the fifth conference now with the Pac-12 being the Pac-2. The point is, he was able to go to a different conference that was better than what he was in and still put up really good numbers. And he had 10 TDs his last season. This is somebody who definitely can be a really solid threat on this team, and you can argue that was a steal getting him in the 10th round. I think it's a really good pick. I mean, this is a dude who's 6'2", 190, so this is a big guy. So this is a really good pick. Now, their overall draft grade, I'm going to be giving it a B+. Why a B+? Well, I really can't say I dislike many of their selections. It's just that I wouldn't have drafted cornerbacks when you have a massive need at tight end, essentially because of the fact that Cody Latimer might retire. Again, he said he was gonna. Did that change when he got hurt? But also, you didn't draft a quarterback. They're the only team that somehow had every quarterback at some point in the season just lose stock in them. Now, Chase Garbers had his stock rise, and then it plummeted at the end of the year, especially with that championship game performance. Quentin Dormady had a bunch of hype, and he proved to be not that guy. And then Kevin Hogan played like one drive, and that's basically it. So you should have drafted a quarterback, and you should have drafted a tight end. Right? We saw other teams draft quarterbacks just because of the threat that their quarterback is going to retire or not come back to the league. Whereas the Brahmas, who have that threat at tight end, didn't draft a tight end, despite there being some good ones there. And then, of course, you have another issue in the sense that you didn't draft a quarterback, despite you desperately needing to. Other teams drafted quarterbacks that just didn't need to. The Panthers didn't need to, and they did. The Defenders did not need the draft too, and they did that. It was stupid, but they did it. The Brahmas didn't. So because of that, I can't give them an A-. They did not have a draft that was as good as teams that had an A- or better, but it was still a good draft, so I'm going to give it a B+. So that'll do it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. If you want to support the channel, think about becoming a channel member for 99 cents a month to get an exclusive non-UFL sports video every month, team emojis, and other stuff. And as always, guys, have a great night.